The first thing I remember from that night is something breathing underneath my bed. I was 8 years old. We had moved into our first house. It was pre-owned when my dad bought it. It looked renovated, but the price was good. So my father was extra happy. Still, I hated being alone at night. I had always been an anxious kid, and my imagination could turn the smallest noise into something terrifying. A creak downstairs could keep me awake for an hour. A shadow under my bedroom door could convince me someone was standing in the hallway. My parents used to let me sleep in their room whenever I got scared. Eventually, my parents decided I was old enough to stay in my own bed, so I learned to deal with the noises. Or at least I thought I did. One night, I woke up sometime after midnight. The room was completely dark. I was lying on my side, staring toward the wall. Then I heard something underneath my bed. A slow inhale, then an exhale. I held my breath. It happened again. Inhale. Exhale. I heard the breathing again. It was too deep, too slow, and it sounded like whoever or whatever was underneath me was trying very hard not to make noise. I didn't look. I pulled the blanket over my head. Then I heard 3 scratches against the underside of my mattress. I remember squeezing my eyes shut. And then, nothing. The next thing I remember is sunlight. I was sitting on my parents' bedroom floor. I had no idea how I got there. My dad was standing in front of me, staring at my face. My mom was sitting on the edge of the bed. Neither of them looked like they'd just woken up. They looked worried. My dad asked me, "Do you remember coming in here?" I said no. He asked me if I remembered what happened in my room. Again, no. He didn't answer. According to my parents, I'd woken them up sometime around 4 in the morning. They said I'd been standing outside their bedroom door, banging my head on their door. But I hadn't been crying. I hadn't been screaming. I'd just been standing there, completely still. My dad said he opened the door and asked what I was doing. I apparently looked directly at him. Then I walked past him and stood in the middle of their bedroom. They said I kept staring toward the hallway. My mom asked me what I was afraid of. According to her, I pointed toward my bedroom. Then I said something neither of them understood. My parents thought I was having a nightmare or sleeping-walking. They tried asking me questions, but I apparently stopped responding. I just kept looking toward the hallway. Eventually, they got me back to sleep in my bedroom. Then my father noticed something strange. My bed had moved, not a few inches. It had been pulled several feet away from the wall. It was impossible for me to remove it due to how heavy it was. My dad knew he hadn't moved it, and my parents hadn't heard anything heavy being dragged across the floor. He looked underneath the bed. There was nothing there, but he noticed something else. There were marks scratched into the wooden floor underneath the bed. They weren't deep, but they were fresh, and they hadn't been there earlier that day. My dad checked the windows, locked. The bedroom door had been closed. The house was secure. We didn't have pets, so nothing explained the marks. In the morning, when my mom woke up, she saw I was sitting in the room floor without blinking. My parents slowly tapped my shoulder. That's when I woke up in the middle of their floor. I couldn't remember anything about last night. My parents' guess were that probably moving to a new place had caused some issues and it will get better. Instead of my mind being restless, my parents would read prayers before sleeping. Eventually, everything it did became better. For years, I assumed it had all been a nightmare. Maybe I had been sleepwalking, but I still didn't understand how it's possible for me to move the mattress that was even heavy for my father. As I got older, the memory became less important. I stopped thinking about it until I was 17. I was cleaning out some old boxes in the garage when I found a small camera. My dad used to keep it near the computer. I started scrolling through the old photographs. Most of them were completely ordinary. Then I found one image. It was a photograph of me sitting on my parents' bed, but something in the background caught my attention. At the very end of the hallway was my bedroom door. It was also open. I stared at the photograph for a long time. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a dark shape standing beside my bedroom door. It looked like the outline of a person. I showed my dad. He immediately took the camera from my hand. Then he deleted it. I asked him why. He said it happened by accident. I asked him about that night. He told me I was a kid and probably dreamed the entire thing. But now that I connect the dots, my family had become more religious after that incident. I still don't know what I saw that night. I was around 9 or 10 years old, and at the time I shared a bedroom with my younger brother. He was probably 5 or 6. My bed was directly across from the bedroom door, and I always slept with the door open. In my house, keeping your bedroom door closed was basically a big no-no unless it was my parents' bedroom. Our bedrooms were upstairs, and from where I slept I could see down the hallway toward my parents' room. That night I remember having a dream, and there was someone walking toward me. At first I couldn't understand what I was looking at. It looked like a person, or at least something shaped like one. It was really tall, probably around 6 feet 2, and it had a very broad frame. But the entire figure was completely black. The closest way I can describe it is that it looked like someone wearing a long robe with a hood over their head. That's honestly the closest comparison I can make. I could tell there was a human-like body underneath it, but I couldn't make out any actual features. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see hands. I couldn't see arms or legs. There were no details. Just this tall, broad, dark figure moving slowly down the hallway. I remember staring at it, trying to understand what I was seeing. My brain was telling me that it couldn't possibly be real. The figure seemed to be coming from the direction of my parents' bedroom. Their bedroom door was closed, and I remember thinking, how is someone coming from there? But it kept moving toward me. It got closer to my bedroom. Then it turned toward the staircase. I watched it turn. And then for some reason it stopped. It turned directly toward me. I remember looking straight at it, and then it disappeared. Just like that, I tried to scream. But nothing came out. My voice felt completely stuck in my throat. And then I woke up. I looked toward the hallway. It was completely dark. My brother was still sleeping beside me. That's when I realized I was awake. I didn't wake my brother. I didn't even want to put my feet on the floor. I remember thinking that if I lowered my feet from the bed, whatever I had just seen might still be standing there. So I slowly moved myself into the corner of my bed. I reached over and turned my bedroom light on, and I left it on for the rest of the night. I didn't go back to sleep. For the next few months, I didn't tell my parents what happened. I convinced myself it had just been a dream. A really strange dream that felt incredibly real. I eventually tried to forget about it. And for a while, I did. Until one night, months later, my little brother suddenly screamed. I woke up immediately. He was pointing toward the hallway. He kept saying that he had seen somebody standing there. My parents came out of their bedroom and tried to calm him down, but my brother kept repeating the same thing. Someone was standing in the hallway. I remember sitting there listening to him. And then I got the biggest goosebumps. Because the way he was describing the figure sounded incredibly similar to what I had seen months earlier. The same general shape, the same tall figure, the same strange presence in the hallway. And my brother had no idea that I had ever experienced anything like that. I had never told him. I had never told my parents. I had kept the whole thing to myself because I genuinely believed it had just been a dream. But now my little brother was standing there, scared, describing something that I recognized. I didn't know what to say. I didn't tell my parents about my experience that night either. I was too young to understand what was happening, and honestly I was scared that if I told them, they would think I was making it up. My parents decided it would be better for my brother to sleep with them that night, and I wasn't about to stay alone in that bedroom, so I went with them. After that night, my brother refused to sleep in the bedroom with the door open. My parents started leaving a light on in the room and eventually kept the door closed at night. And even though years have passed, I still remember that hallway. I still remember waking up and seeing that figure walking toward me. Maybe it really was a dream. Maybe there is a perfectly normal explanation for what happened to me. Maybe my brother experienced something completely different and simply described it in a way that reminded me of my own experience. I don't know. But what I can't get out of my head is that I never told anyone what I had seen. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know what my brother saw either. But I do know one thing. I will never sleep with my bedroom door open again, even now. I remember opening my eyes and seeing the darkness above me. For a few seconds, I couldn't understand what was happening. Then I realized my leg wasn't resting on the bed anymore. It was lifted into the air. I grabbed my grandfather's shirt so hard that I nearly tore it. "Grandpa?" He woke up immediately. "What happened?" I couldn't answer. I just pointed toward my leg. He looked down, and even though I was only a child, I could tell from his face that he had seen it too. My leg was still raised, and there was nothing underneath it. This happened in 2007 when I was around 8 years old in a small village in Asia. Back then, our life was nothing like what I'm used to now. There was no internet, no television. And electricity wasn't something we had in our house. Our home was a simple one, built mostly from clay and mud with a straw roof over it. Right in front of the house was a narrow river. During the summer, the river was clear enough that you could see the bottom in certain places. People didn't use it for some reason. There were stories about it. Warnings about things people claimed happened near the water after dark. As a child, I didn't care about any of that. Actually, I loved scary stories. During the summer, I often slept outside with my grandpa on a bamboo bed. There wasn't much entertainment at night, so we'd lie there under the open sky while he told me stories. Sometimes they were funny. Sometimes they were stories about our village. And sometimes they were stories about ghosts. I would pretend I wasn't scared because I wanted him to keep talking. That night started exactly like all the others. The air was warm. The bamboo beneath us made small sounds whenever we moved. I could hear insects outside and the occasional movement from inside the house. The river was only a short distance away. Eventually, my grandfather's voice became quieter. I was getting sleepy. I remember staring into the darkness for a while. Then I fell asleep. At least I thought I did. The next thing I remember is the feeling of something touching my leg. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Sometimes when you're falling asleep, your body can jerk or you can feel like you're falling. So I tried to ignore it. Then it happened again. My leg moved. I opened my eyes. I was still lying on the bamboo bed. My grandfather was beside me. Everything looked normal. So I closed my eyes, and then my leg suddenly jerked upward. That's when I knew something was wrong. I felt pressure around my ankle. It felt like someone had grabbed me. I tried pulling my leg back. I couldn't. It was as if something below the bed had hold of me. I panicked. I grabbed my grandfather's shirt and shook him awake. "Grandpa?" He sat up. "What?" I pointed down at my leg. He looked, and then he immediately reached underneath his pillow. My grandfather always kept a knife there. It was for spiritual purposes. He pulled it out and slowly looked around. "Where is it?" he asked. I just stared at him. He looked toward the ground, then toward the river, then around the yard. There was nobody there. No animal, no person, nothing. But my leg was still raised. My grandfather stood up. He started waving the knife around the space above me, almost as if he was trying to cut through something I couldn't see. I remember being completely frozen. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even move. I just watched him. Then he started saying things under his breath, something in our old family native language. I didn't understand everything he said, but I recognized the tone. He wasn't joking. He was trying to protect me. After a few seconds, my leg dropped back onto the bamboo bed. Just like that. The pressure disappeared. My grandfather stared at my leg, then he looked toward the river again. And this is the part that still bothers me. He didn't look surprised. He looked concerned. He immediately called for my parents. My father and mother came outside. My grandfather told them what had happened. I expected them to laugh. They didn't. My father picked me up and carried me inside. I remember looking over his shoulder as we went through the doorway. My grandfather stayed outside. He went back to the bamboo bed, and he continued sleeping there. I couldn't understand how he could do that. I just felt something grab my leg, something none of us could see, and he was acting as if it was something he had dealt with before. I refused to sleep outside after that. Not that night, not the next night. As far as I was concerned, the bamboo bed could stay outside forever. For several months, my grandfather continued sleeping there. Whenever I asked him about what happened, he never gave me a straight answer. Until one day I finally asked him why. That's when he told me something I hadn't known. A few days before that night, a little girl from the village had died in an accident. I don't remember all the details. I was too young. But I remember what my grandfather said about what happened afterward. In our village, when someone died, there were traditions that had to be followed. The body had to be taken to be buried. And to get there, people had to cross the river in front of our house. That meant that only days before I felt something pull my leg, people had been carrying the body of that little girl across the same river. My grandfather believed there could be a connection. He never told me that he was absolutely certain it was a ghost. He simply said that sometimes, after someone died suddenly, strange things could happen, especially around places connected to the person. As a child, that explanation terrified me. But as an adult, I think about it differently. I know how memory works. I know how dreams can feel real. I know that children can misunderstand things. Maybe I had some kind of sleep-related hallucination. Maybe my grandfather saw my leg moving and interpreted what happened through the beliefs he grew up with. There are plenty of explanations. And honestly, today, living in America, part of me finds the whole thing difficult to believe. The first time I heard someone walking through my house while I was completely alone, I told myself it was nothing. But there was one night when I heard a woman humming. That was the night I stopped trying to explain it. I grew up in a very old house. It was more than 100 years old, and my family had been there for generations. My dad had actually lived in that same house his entire life. When he was young, my grandparents had converted part of the attic into 2 bedrooms. One of those rooms eventually became the bedroom my sister and I shared. It was at the back of the upstairs, directly above the living room. And there was something strange about that room. I was probably around 10 or 11 the first time I heard it. I was downstairs alone when something upstairs suddenly slammed into the floor. I remember looking up at the ceiling. For a few seconds I didn't move. Then I ran upstairs. The old staircase creaked underneath every step as I climbed. When I reached the bedroom, I pushed the door open. Nothing. The room looked exactly the same. Eventually, I convinced myself that old houses make strange noises. So I forgot about it. Until it happened again. Sometimes it happened when I was downstairs alone. I didn't tell my parents. I figured they'd tell me I was imagining things. Then, years later, I casually mentioned it to my mom. She became quiet. Then my sister said, "You hear that too?" Apparently, they'd both heard it. For years. None of us had ever talked about it. That was the first time I seriously wondered whether the noises were coming from something other than the house settling. Until I was 16. One afternoon, I was sitting in our bedroom playing Super Mario World. The television was positioned near the window, and I was sitting with my back toward the rest of the room. I was completely absorbed in the game. At the beginning of a level, the screen briefly went dark. Normally, I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but the dark screen acted like a mirror. And in that reflection, I saw someone standing behind me. A woman. She was close enough that I should have heard her walk into the room. For a split second, I assumed it was my sister. I actually started turning around with a smile, because I thought she'd been trying to sneak up on me. But when I looked, there was nobody there. My bedroom was empty. I immediately looked toward the hallway. Nothing. I went back upstairs and restarted the game. Then I did something that probably sounds ridiculous now. I kept restarting the level. I wanted the screen to go black again. I wanted to prove to myself that I'd just seen some weird glitch. But every time the screen darkened, there was nothing behind me. I remember telling my dad about what had happened. He just looked uncomfortable. He told me I was probably mistaken. I accepted that explanation, or at least I pretended to. But after that, I started paying attention to the house. Things I'd ignored when I was younger suddenly felt different. Then came the night I heard the footsteps. I was 17. It was summer, and our house didn't have central air yet. We kept the windows open whenever the weather allowed it. I was sitting at the computer in the living room. The front door was open. There wasn't even enough wind to move the curtains. Then the front door started closing. Slowly, I looked over. At first, I assumed the air had shifted. But the window's curtains weren't moving. Nothing else in the room moved. The door continued closing until it reached the frame. Then I heard the latch click into place. That immediately made me uncomfortable. That door was old. It didn't simply close and lock itself. You had to pull it into exactly the right position for the latch to catch. I stared at it. Then I heard something behind the door. A footstep. Someone was walking through the house. I couldn't see them. The footsteps moved away from the front entrance and toward the living room. I remember staring at the computer screen without actually seeing anything on it. The footsteps were getting closer. They passed behind me. I could hear the floorboards creaking under the person's weight. And just when I thought they were going to stop, I heard a woman humming, like someone humming to themselves while doing chores. I sat there listening until the footsteps faded. Then the humming stopped. The entire house became silent. I told my family, but my dad still refused to say the house was haunted. He always had an explanation. Or at least he tried to. Years passed. I moved out. Life went on. But I never completely forgot about that house. Then one day, my sister called me. She'd been back at our parents' house alone. She asked me something that immediately brought everything back.
Do you remember that sound from our old bedroom?